All right, everyone. Good evening. Sorry for some technical difficulties there. We were just joking about how we still are stuck in 2020 when it comes to doing Zoom. This is Rob Orson with the Emerging Revolutionary War. I am happy to be joined by ERW historian author Mark Malloy, and then our adopted friend here, Mr. John Adams extraordinaire, Chris Makowski. And our good friend Kate Egner, who has been with us many times before and knows a lot more about the American Revolution than me, Mark, and Chris combined. She'll say that's not true, but it is true.
That's not
Um,
true at all.
it,
Demonstrably not
it
true.
is true. It is very true. But as we've been talking about, we were all excited about catching the new American Revolutionary a documentary on PBS done by Ken Burns that I think a lot of people were excited about in our field and museums and historic sites. And we said that we would come on every night at 10 o'clock or 10:07, sorry, to kind of just do a quick recap of what we thought about it. And every night this week, we will have these three or four people on every night, different historians from our group every evening. And tonight we get to go first and we get to cover that first episode, which I think a lot of us on this call are very focused on from some of the things that we have worked on, we have written about, and we're interested in, which is the build up to April 19th, 1775. So I'm just going to make this really quick go around the horn kind of thing here, and I'm going to let Kate, if you like to go first, because you're first on my screen, just kind of, and we'll dive a little bit more into some deeper topics, but if you can just kind of give a quick overview of your first impressions.
No, I obviously the buildup for this has been massive, and I feel like when I finally saw 8 o'clock and the episode went live and I clicked play, I was like, whoa, finally. I feel like it's been, you can't get on social media without getting hit with ads about this thing coming up or, special previews coming up. So I think, so far, I think worth the hype. And it's interesting to me that, I was thinking about, I don't know that we're really the target audience
Right.
for this. I think the target audience is, although, we totally are, because I think that this is going to hit, it's going to hit academic nerds in a way, and I think it's going to hit just people who have a general interest, a passing interest in the 250th, in a good way too. I'm really excited to see um, how the rest of the series follows the 2 hour format because this was a lot.
Yes.
We just opened right up into George Washington firing the first shots of the French and Indian War, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to get to we have to get to Lexington and Concord. This is someone's dissertation. This is someone's, 8 years or more of their life, probably. We're going to do it
Right.
in 2 hours. Let's go. So what I thought was really interesting how there's a lot of familiar stories, that are kind of woven along. We have these milestones to get to in the lead up of the revolution, but I did like that a lot of the milestone events were told through lesser known lenses. And that's what Ken Burns does really well. And that's what these talking heads do, really well. And so I thought that was, my first impression was, I think we're off to a really good, if not a really fast-paced start.
Right. I agree. And I'm going to go to you, Chris, because you and I are the only ones on this call that probably remember the Ken Burns Civil War series that came out many, many years ago. Of course,
Yeah,
I'll
I,
be
and I,
completely
I
honest.
sort of, I sort of
I'll
wish
be
I hadn't
completely
seen the Civil War before I saw this one because there were a lot of things I saw tonight that felt like redos or reovers or even pale imitations of the Civil War and the way he
Mhm.
put that together. Even, a heavy leaning into the violin music, for instance, as an example.
Right.
But I thought that it was the technology that allowed him to film some of the shots is a lot sharper. So that I thought that it was just a beautiful, beautiful set of sceneries that he did as B-roll. I thought he was really creative in the shots that he came up with. So it was, as I expected, to be a lush, beautiful production to look at, and I thought he did a really good job using like paintings and things. We don't have photos we can lean on, but boy, he found a lot of art that he could use. A lot of it modern, a lot of it historical, and he mixed that in really well as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, his team always does a wonderful job, even with all the documentaries, baseball, you name it, all the ones, Vietnam, all the ones he's done has been fantastic. And a lot of it's got to do with the audio and the cinematography. Um, we recognize, I don't know if you all did, I'm sure you guys did, but we recognize a lot of Colonial Williamsburg,
Yeah.
a lot of, a lot of the buildings that us and a lot of people watching us tonight have already visited and seen. So it's good to see him tie in some of those, relatable historic sites that we like so much. Mark, you always have an opinion on something, so that's why I saved you for last.
Yeah, no. And I agree with Kate too. Like the buildup for this, I think this is probably the biggest 250th thing I've seen, where even people who aren't in the history circles are talking about it. And yeah, I mean it's getting coverage from every major news source and commentary place. So this is a big 250th milestone. And I know, doing reenactments and things like that, the Ken Burns group has been attending different events and things like that. So there've been murmurs and talks about this documentary coming out for a long time. And you're right, also, Chris. When I was telling just my wife about this coming out, she was like, "Well, how's he going to do that? There's no photographs." And it's like that's what Ken Burns is most famous for, is taking photographs and turning them into these documentaries. But one of my favorite Ken Burns one is his Thomas Jefferson documentary. And and growing up, the litmus test for me was my favorite documentary was a 1994 A&E 6-part series about the American Revolution. And I remember growing up seeing that and watching that over and over again, and really kind of instilled me with a love of the story of the revolution. And to Kate's point too, that's really the audience. And I'm hoping that these as we go through this series and as people continue to watch this, that there are young people that are going to watch this and be really inspired to want to learn more about these things. And yeah, no. So for the first episode, yeah, I agree. It's this huge, going from 1754 to 1775, especially for a group like us where we did a whole 3 days in just Lexington and Concord, doing a bus tour and lectures and talks. And it's like we know the minutia and the nitty gritty, and it's like to actually sum that all up in 10 or 15 minutes is difficult. The task is difficult, but I think and there are things I'm sure we'll nitpick some of this stuff. But I think from a broad perspective, I thought, yeah, it was really beautifully shot, very colorful. I thought there was a good mix of historical quotes and talking heads, and yeah, modern shots versus paintings and historical pieces. And yeah, and I think overall, I thought it did a good job of just really showing what a big story this really is. But I do think I really like that the last half hour or so, where it really got into Boston, Lexington, Concord, and the military piece, I thought was my favorite part. But yeah, overall though, I'm excited for the coming nights too.
So I'm reading the comments, and thank you everyone who's watching for the comments. I'm trying to keep up. A lot of the same things we're saying. There's some comments about, and I agree with all of these. Of course, I'm a Lexington and Concord. I'm kind of, favored to that, and some people don't like the way that was portrayed. Um, Before we came on live, when Mark and I were trying to figure out the technology, our good friend Alex Kane, who's a great historian in Lexington, just hates the Parker was a French Indian War veteran, and I think Mark had the same feeling I did when I saw that live. I said, Alex is somewhere throwing something at his television. Um, and if Alex, if you're watching or you will watch, I'll connect with you later. But that's a myth that's out there. But when you put something this big together, some of those are going to bleed in, I think. Um, it's hard to be, we say it's easy to be accurate, but I guess it's hard when you're looking at a huge 10-hour, 12-hour production you're putting together. I do think though that like, and we can continue to nitpick because that's what we do, but I do like how they showed the buildup, right? Like I was interested in when they were going to start. They start a lot about American Indians, Native Americans, and who was here. Um, I thought that was good, but then it didn't really to me it didn't really didn't connect to what they were trying to do in the story. I think it's important to show that, but I just didn't see them connect it properly. Um, but I like the other build up. They talk about all the different smaller events. Obviously the Boston Massacre's in there, but the Gatsby there in Rhode Island, you never hear about that anywhere. They covered it in this. They show that ever slight build up to what happened, obviously, with the Boston Tea Party and all those events. I also like how they cover Gage. They talked a lot about Gage in New York City to kind of give you some background to he wasn't always this hated man, and he kind of predicted how the Americans were going to react to certain things that, Parliament and the King were trying to do later on. That great quote, I use this quote in all my talks about, if you think I need 10,000 men, send me 20,000. Like he's trying to show his boss over in London, hey, things are much worse here than you had expected. But I think the buildup was great, and as far as showing how things got to the point where they start, obviously a revolution. But last thing I'll say is they really focus on the Quebec Act, which I think is great because you always roll the Quebec Act into the intolerable or coercive acts. And the Quebec Act really ties in that religious aspect of the revolution, right? French, Canadian, Catholic, and this Quebec Act really upset a lot of the Protestants in the lower colonies. And you very rarely hear anything about that in something like this. And I think them even mentioning it and covering it, even though slightly, was pretty important.
I made a note. Sorry, this is Indrid, who's now joining us.
That's fine.
But no, it's funny. I was taking notes too, and I wrote down the Quebec Act. And when I did, I was like, huh, wow, really? We're going there? I haven't thought, I mean, we all do this work for our careers. I haven't thought about the Quebec Act probably since undergrad. It seems to be something that, is was monumental in the moment, but does kind of get either thrown into just this litany of issues or just kind of shoved away in, other treatises of the coming of the revolution. I thought that was interesting. I also I liked there are some small nods toward the proclamation line. One of the quotes I wrote down, I wish I had written down who said it, but someone pretty early on made the argument that the American Revolution was a war of land.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that, so Rob, I hear your point, and I agree with you about I liked how we started in the indigenous space and then it didn't connect to anything. And I kind of wondered if that could have been a stronger connection because we started off with kind of the Ohio Valley and then kind of walked away from that for a really long time. Then there was this land comment that didn't really come back into play. Maybe it will, but that is something that I did find pretty missing so far in the coming of the revolution and why a lot of people, we talked a lot about the economy, the land aspect, and who owns the land and who thinks they want the land and who's going to get rich off of it, and that having everything to do with what your royal governments say that you can and can't do. I mean, I just feel like that was pretty conspicuously absent for me so far.
Yeah.
No, I
And I think,
agree.
one of the problems we're having is it's episode one of several.
Right,
So we don't know kind of where this is going. Because I
right,
also felt like, all right, we've got some pretty fascinating themes that are getting introduced at the beginning, but where's the through thread and where are these going?
right.
I come from right near the Seneca Reservation in Western New York, and I'm interested in their history. And they get mentioned, and then suddenly, like, oh, we're gone for a while, And so, how's that coming back in later? I'm really going to be looking for that.
Yeah. And talking about, opening the whole thing up with the Haudenosaunee and that union. are we going to talk about how the American Revolution starts impacting that? So
Right.
hopefully episode one is laying the groundwork for what the through lines are going to be.
Yeah. And to that, when talking about the Quebec Act, like I'm hoping we're going back there. I mean, Quebec becomes an issue later on, and so maybe here's where the breadcrumbs are getting laid down for a payoff later on.
I'm having fun just reading the comments. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
we were right about Alex. He did throw
yeah,
something
Alex
at the.
did throw something at the TV. So, Alex, I did that here in Virginia as well, buddy. Uh,
Well, and
uh,
myths die hard. And when you have such a platform, when you're this big of a thing, I would hope that we would, if we're going to start, I don't know, if we're going to go down the myth road, I hope that there's a reason for it. And somebody actually did say early on that like these are our founding stories. This is our founding mythology. And it kind of makes me wonder, um, when we get to Yorktown, is it going to be the world turned upside down? Um, being
uh-oh.
played at the surrender. I wonder if that's going to be perpetuated because it's part of our founding mythology.
Well,
You
let
know,
me ask you guys this because I thought, what did you think of the treatment of George Washington, particularly at the
I
beginning?
was going to ask Mark that. Yeah, I was going to ask Mark because Mark, I don't talk about Washington around Mark. So
I texted Rob early on, first 5 minutes of this. Mark's gonna love this because it was so George Washington heavy so early on.
go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean, I think it's good that they bring in his French and Indian War experience. And again, I think this is where, because yeah, he comes off strong right at the beginning, and then we didn't see him at all. But I'm assuming, he's obviously going to come back into the story.
You had like 15 minutes. How much more do you want?
That's the
Jeez.
other thing too. Some of these you could do. You could do it an
Yeah.
entire. You should do a whole documentary just on Washington. But maybe
And
that's down
Rose
the.
did Franklin.
Right.
Correct.
I wonder why there hasn't been maybe it's coming. Maybe this is just kind of like maybe this whole thing is going to be like a Taylor Swift setup. So we're going to get to the very
Huh.
last episode and he's
You're
going to be like,
killing me
"But
now.
wait, we're going to drop a six-part George Washington, a six-part Hamilton, a six-part,
The one thing I'll say too, I like that I mentioned before, and Kate, you and I talked about this over text, is like some of the civilian tie-ins, like the Yorktown.
yeah.
Obviously, we're in Virginia and we want a little bit more Virginia, but that's because we're Virginia focused. But tying in, Hearst, the Betsy story, and some of the other Phyllis Wheatley, obviously was. I think we all knew that was going to be kind of important throughout this, and I know Kate and I saw a preview of some of these episodes already, so we knew she was going to be highlighted in there as well. A lot about the contradiction of liberty and slavery that was in there. I think we knew that was going to be in there as well. That's a topic that's definitely worth covering. But I don't think it was like inundated with that. I think they were trying. I think they focused, as you said. Someone said it's. I think it was Rick Atkinson that said it was our origination story, and I think that's what they were going for. Even though, as I'm reading here, there are some things they could have done better. Um,
Well,
and
and also just on that, I just want to hop on too to say that we mentioned they talk about the land, they talk about the economics. One thing that I don't think that was brought out as richly as you would think with the American Revolution is the Enlightenment and all the thoughts of what liberty is and John Locke and all the Enlightenment thinkers, like that whole thought class that kind of like brought a lot of these ideals and the ideas of the rights of Englishmen and all that kind of stuff. It's mentioned in passing, but and that's something that I know some folks are really upset that Lexington and Concord didn't go more in depth on the retreat and the battle. But I was surprised they didn't use the Jason Russell story. But
oh
yeah, the
yeah,
fact that he's talking about fighting for the rights of Englishmen on his doorstep, like so there are definitely things that I was surprised there wasn't a bigger focus on the Enlightenment on the rights of Englishmen
um,
during that part.
I'm
maybe
assuming we're going to
episode
get a big
two.
dose of the Enlightenment when Jefferson shows up next episode,
Yeah,
since he sort
yeah.
of personifies that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, you know.
I
True.
do
Mhm.
hope that there's more of a, yeah, maybe there's more of a conversation there when, and I was, don't shoot me, but I was even, thinking about um that long history of government structure. There was that infographic, that showed the, how Parliament is structured, and
Yeah.
um, you know, there there very well could have been a nod to the Magna Carta. There could have been a nice nod to, in that moment, to these ideals of, yeah, Mark, your point, the Enlightenment era, the conversations about what life and liberty and pursuit of property means. Those are conversations that are happening on both sides of the Atlantic. So right now, it does
Mm.
seem like we are situating the ideological bit of the American Revolution very much in the 13 about to be rebelling colonies, when really it's a longer, much more robust and transatlantic conversation. But yeah, Chris, I wonder if that's going to be a big part of when we meet Thomas Jefferson and he's, noodling around in Philly in 76, and maybe that'll be part of it.
Yeah.
Gabe has a good point here too, and some others. So far, there seems to be a northern bias
Yeah,
on the
for sure.
story. Um, and that I did see a little bit about the Tea Party in Charleston, but that's less and some mentioning of Virginia, and they did mention Patrick Henry, but didn't mention in depth some of these things. So
Yeah, where's
we'll
the
see.
Battle of Alamance? The
Yeah.
Battle of
first battle,
Alamance, get out of
right?
here.
And I was surprised, being that they started the first 10 minutes really heavy on the Indians, that they're, yeah, Dunmore's War, not mentioned.
I thought that's the way we were gonna start. When we started talking about the Virginia militia, I was like, "Oh my God, are we starting Dunmore's War?" And I was so excited. And then that's not where it went at all.
No,
Dumb.
And it's
yeah.
it's it's
Well,
tough because of course, obviously a lot of history to cram in a short amount of time, and I'm
yeah,
sure there are things that all of us would have liked to have seen this or that, and maybe that's an instance of us because we know more than the average person. We've got kind of
sure,
the things that we understand the story, but
sure.
um, so it'll be kind of interesting as the series goes on how they cover some of these things and did they do a good job or not? What they leave in, what they leave out. And not knowing what the full arguments are that they're building, it's even maybe a little more frustrating for me to kind of know, like, well, could this have helped that they left out, or could that have helped if they'd have put it in? Because I don't know where the story's going, or I don't know where the argument's going.
And if they don't mention Mohawk Valley later in the episode, I think Brian Mack over at Fort Plain's going to have things to throw too, like Alex did. But we're getting there, Brian. We're going to get there. I'm sure it'll be mentioned in some way, shape, or form. Um, real
There,
quick, go ahead. Was that
well,
you,
I was
Kate?
gonna say there are two things that I thought early on, were really successful for me and could have even been more. But I think that this intro was doing a really good job of setting up that the colonists really do it. It will be a culture shock to think of themselves as something other than British. And I
Mhm.
I thought that that was a really good point to make, because I think that, 250 years later, our hindsight is that, the revolution was, always going to, work out in the favor of, the rebelling colonists, and that everything was going to work out and everyone lived happily ever after. And that could not be, further from the truth. And I think that um, so far this is doing a really good job, I think, of setting up a lot of anxieties and how those identities are starting to shift. Um, I think that could have been even more of a part of the storyline. And again, maybe it will as we get closer to 1776 and those arguments are starting to really take shape of what will this mean if we aren't British subjects anymore. But the other thing that I thought was really good, some of the historians made the point that we tend to, in hindsight, sanitize the American Revolution
Hmm.
and think about it in terms of the American Revolution instead of the Revolutionary War. And so I thought that this episode did do a good job of reminding us that, this is really violent. I liked all of the attention that was paid on, Malcolm being tarred and feathered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that scene from the John Adams miniseries made me
Yeah.
physically ill. And I can watch horror movies all day long and be very entertained by it, but that scene in John Adams, I like still haunts me.
Mm.
And so I think this is doing a good job of reminding folks that, hey, like the loyalists are the conservative ones in this conversation. They're the ones that are looking at the mob violence in the streets, especially in, the Boston part of the story, and thinking like, this is not how we do things. This is something different. So I think focusing on, yeah, this was violent. This was mob rule. And again, we could have even had more of those stories when it comes to, when it was, um, in the 1760s and Pope's Day and all of that. We could have, gone further into mob rule and how that starts to take hold. But yeah, I think that that's an important point that we collectively tend to miss. And so bringing it forward in episode one, I think was a really good call.
Yeah. Uh, I have a serious thing to bring up real quick. Chris, what time is it in Great Britain right now?
Too late for Darren Rollins to be watching, but
Darren
apparently he
Rollins is over
is.
here saying "God save the King." I was hoping.
3 a.m.,
Yeah,
3:30 in the
I think
morning.
they're 5 ahead of us.
He's probably he's
Yeah.
over here trolling me right now. I can't
Yeah.
get away from this guy.
Kate,
Thank
to
you,
your
Darren, for watching.
Yeah. Kate, to your point about the mob violence too, and that was maybe the one thing, the missed opportunity I thought where they didn't get into the Boston Massacre trial very much, and I would have liked to see just a little bit more of that because that idea of like the rule of law is really important,
Yes.
so that it's not just mob rule, but like there's still some sort of underpinning of law and order that's going to have a sort of a real important philosophical legacy as guys like John Adams and Sam Adams get to the Continental Congresses and it's suddenly not angry mobs of people, but some sort of structure that they have to build
Real
in place.
dialogue, yeah.
Yep.
And I was wondering, we were getting really far down into the story about the trial, and I thought, are they not going to name drop John Adams? And then finally he said, "Oh, Sam Adams' cousin John." I was like, "Oh, okay." I thought, are we going to let John go without bringing him into this conversation that he was the
Yeah, it
Right,
was
right.
more
lawyer?
Sam than John tonight, Chris. Are you
Yeah,
okay with
yeah.
that?
I'm perfectly okay with that. John himself said that there would have been no revolution if it hadn't been for Sam. And
Yeah.
considering John's massive ego, if he's willing to cede the spotlight to his cousin, I certainly am too.
Kate brought up something and it's in the chat too, really quick about the talking heads or the historians. There were some different people on there that you hadn't seen before. You had Ellis on there and Reed and others that you would see, but there's some newer historians. But there's some comments in here that it's all academic historians, which I think obviously we're all public historians here, and we have sometimes different views in academics, but I think that's kind of traditional what Barnes has done, right? Is use the academic historians. I mean, I knew Rick Atkinson was in it because Rick told us he was going to be in it, so we already knew that, but don't see any kind of like the
Well, good.
experts at the sites, you see the academics,
Yeah.
so which I think
Annette
is
Gordon-Reed was in.
yeah, she was in there too. That's true. Um,
But you're right. I had the same thought too. And I think Rick is the first talking head we see.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I had that thought. I'm really curious as we keep going through the histories, who else is going to be brought in. I was thrilled to see Bernard Balin. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I love
but
Joe Ellis. I thought he was underutilized. He's the guy that sort of made me fall in love with these guys in the first place.
yeah.
So
yeah.
it's kind of fun to
And Phil
see.
Brook was there. Our good friend
Oh,
Jim Moss mentioned Phil Brook. He was in there briefly.
Yeah.
Another great author.
I was waiting for like who's the Shelby Foote of this series, and so far there is not a kind of charming persona of any sort that has that charisma that makes me like I'm going to sit and listen to this person for
They
yeah.
hours.
didn't call Mark Malloy. That's
Yeah,
why.
see,
Mark
yeah.
Malloy is the Shelby Foote of.
Well, that and I agree with all that, and I did notice they lean heavily on Rick for like all the military aspect of
Yeah.
it. So I'll be interested to see if in the future episodes if that continues to be his role or if they do bring in any other people. But yeah,
Right.
um, no, they should give me a call. I guess sat there with my cigar and
in your bourbon like Shelby Foot.
I I will say, in Dan Welch mentioned, no Ashokan farewell, music that, it'd be, I thought the music was good, but yeah, I was kind of curious to see, because on some of them he leans heavily on like one particular theme song or whatever, but it seemed like there was just kind of like a few different ones, with some melodies that came in there that were all right. But overall, I thought it was all right. But it wasn't like, yeah, like, oh, I'm gonna buy the soundtrack for
Right.
this. But
I do have the soundtrack to the Lewis and Clark one.
yeah.
Of course you do. Of
Yeah.
course you do.
But but Chris brought up the point too that like, this is what Ken Burns does really well. And I think that, he and his team are, masters at creating a lot of emotion, a lot of different types of emotion using really simple things. And I don't know if it's because of the moment that we're in, because it's the 250th and, we're all kind of in this like really heavy, but like I don't know. I was excited to watch this. I'm excited for the long week that we're all gonna have, but I started that first episode and I saw those first images start to pan and that music going right over top of it, and I was immediately like, oh, okay, here we go. And in a way that I really didn't expect to be. And I think that if we're kind of feeling that way, I wonder how, more kind of casual viewers are gonna get, kind of Pied Pipered into American history this way. But yeah, I see those images and I hear kind of the emotional music and I'm just like, oh, this is gonna be
I
amazing.
I thought his drone shots were especially effective.
Is
When
that
he does
what
the
that
opening
was? The
credits,
first,
and then that
yeah.
final closing where he's got Abigail Adams's quote that Lori Linning's reading, and those were both really effective opening and closing shots. I thought.
Hmm.
I
And
also really liked the graphic character as he's zooming out to show Boston's Great Wharf, and it was sort of like a 3D-ish
Oh
picture
yeah.
that
Mhm.
mhm.
unfolded. That was really spectacular too.
It's yeah, a lot of
The
people
maps
say
were
go
good.
ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the maps were really good. I liked, a lot of the maps they used, to convey what was going on. And I will say, again, yeah, and and I saw Anthony Trusso on there, mentioning, the lack of use of some of the footage they probably captured from some of the reenactments. And yeah, there, and of course they showed Lexington and, the militia's wearing hunting shirts, and there's all these like inaccuracies in some of those things, which you think, for a project this big, that some of those minor things they'd be able to get right. But at the same point, I would say that, to Kate's point of like that emotional pull, I would say the Isaac Davis story, was really moving, especially, we were just up there in, April. We went to the Acton Green where they're buried, and but having the story of, his wife saying goodbye to him, and then having the body brought back there, like that was. I thought that brought that story so much more to life, that I'm hoping that it will inspire people to hear that story and then want to go to the North Bridge and then go to his resting place there at the Acton Monument. So there were some things like that, that despite all the flaws, I'm hoping that there's like these like real emotional connections people are going to draw out of this series to really inspire them to look more into that.
Well, he's
And I
doing a
think
good
I
job of telling those big milestone moments through those stories that you might not otherwise know. And I think it will do a good job at really centering home the what was at risk here, um, showing how something like Lexington and Concord has it's not just something that you study in your history book, but here's a real lived experience that doesn't have a very happy ending. Again, hopefully that helps people connect with this history in a new way.
Yeah. And I think, Mark, that's a really important point about that emotional connection because, of course, it's harder to do because it's farther away in history from us today. And we don't have those photographs that we can see the people, you know. So, you know, he's got some challenges ahead of him as a filmmaker to help make those emotional connections. So I think we're going to depend on those really strong written accounts. We're going to depend on the music in the background. Um, and I think if he's successful at making those connections, that's a way that's going to make this American mythology into a real person story, I think.
Mhm.
I think the real impact is if, and someone mentioned this earlier, if and now we all work in museums, so it's going to be difficult, but if people go to work tomorrow and people talk about it, right? So I think that's, I was too young when Civil War came out to know if that actually happened. I can say I had to force my 12-year-old to go to bed at 8:30 because he wanted to stay up and watch it. So for what that's worth, maybe he just wanted to stay up, Chris. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Uh,
my 8-year-old happened to walk in during the fight in the North Bridge, and you know, someone was getting a hatchet in the back of their head, and Maxwell's like, "That's messed up," you know.
Hey, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, at the end of the day, we try to engage new people, whether they're 12 or 72, right? So,
Mhm.
well, all right, guys. Well, we said we would keep this short because it's a school night. I want to thank you all. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
I'm anxious to see how tomorrow's episode is going to pick up on these through threads. We got some new characters I'm anticipating seeing. I'm sure we'll get some surprising new characters, so I'm looking forward to seeing who those might be as well. So I'm definitely going to be anxious to tune in.
Kate, Mark, anything else?
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited to kind of keep a running list of questions that we don't have answers to yet and see where it goes.
Yeah,
And
and I'm glad again to see at least the excitement. Like I said, all the negative aspects, and and obviously looking through feed, there's a lot of people nitpicking all sorts of things, and you're going to continue to hear that. But the very fact that the conversation's happening, I think, is great, and I think it's going to do good things for the 250th anniversary cycle in general. So,
yeah,
so
and,
glad
and
glad people are paying attention.
And
So.
we knew it wasn't going to be perfect, right? So I think we'll just have to we'll do this every night. There'll be different people every night until Friday, but then we'll maybe have a recap after that. Look at the whole thing as one volume. But I think it's a good start so far. We'll see how it goes. Everyone's comments on the chat, they're all credible and real. And tomorrow, no one throw anything at the TV. Chris, no throwing at the TV if they do something wrong with John. Okay.
All right, all right.
All right. Well, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mark. And thank you all for watching. Catch us back on here, hopefully at 10 o'clock tomorrow, maybe 10:02, depending on who's running the live stream. But this is Rob Orson with the Emerging Revolutionary War, and thanks for tuning in. Take care.